Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're going to be taking a look at one of my all-time favorite bands, which is no other than Pink Floyd. Are they prog? Are they not? I might say that they are, you might say otherwise, and we can agree to disagree on that. But nevertheless, today I thought it would be nice to share with you my personal favorite song from each album in the 16-album discography that Pink Floyd has. And of course, starting with their first album from 1967.
Why'd you have to leave me there, hanging in my infidel, waiting?
So starting us off, we have Matilda Mother from The Piper at the Gates of Dawn. This is a very influential album and one that people come back to a lot because it doesn't necessarily sound like the later Floyd, but it does have its very unique sound to it. And while there are excellent tracks on it that fall under the category of space rock / psychedelic rock like Astronomy Domine and Pick Up the Stethoscope and Walk, I think, my personal favorite from this album in particular actually has to be Matilda Mother. And you'd see this as a recurring motif later on. My personal favorite from this early Floyd era usually comes down to their more popular tracks. I know it's a bit of a sham, but that's just my own personal take on it. Everything about Matilda Mother is just beautiful. I love the way that they express this feeling of being a young child and, I don't know, just kind of longing for a mother figure. I really don't know why this song came to be, but I know that I love its existence nonetheless. So continuing on the trend with Remember a Day from A Saucer Full of Secrets. Yes, a very psychedelic album by all means, but I chose the more poppy road to go by. Yes, Remember a Day is like Matilda Mother, but just better. I love the way that it just whooshes by me. It sounds so freaking good and it's a great track, and honestly, while I don't consider myself a big fan of the early Floyd era, this is a song that I come back to way too often.
And it's high time, symbolize.
The third album on Pink Floyd's discography is More, and my personal favorite from this one has to be Cymbeline. Probably the most popular song from this one, maybe except for the Nile song. I really like what they do on here. David Gilmour just pumps everything that he has into this one. It's really mellow. It's so light. It gives you the effect as if you're in this, distant country and you're experiencing the feelings and emotions that go with being away from home. I really like the way that this song makes me feel, and honestly, if talking about the lyrics, I think this is one of the first Pink Floyd songs to really feature some really intricate and well thought out lyrics. I'm not saying that the Syd Barrett era was not full with interesting lyricism, but this one really does feel more meaningful than anything that came before it. This is a surprising one. I know, this is a surprising one. When talking about Amagama, a lot of people just don't like this album, and I'm sort of in that realm. I'm not a big fan of Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun or Careful with That Axe, Eugene. They're nice, but I'm not a big fan of psychedelic rock as it is. But when it comes down to it, several species of small furry animals gathered together in a cave and grooving with a pick is a very interesting choice of song making. I know that this is Roger Waters doing whatever he wants to do, and while many would consider this one a very odd song, I must agree it is an odd song, but it has some really interesting underlying features. Whenever I listen to this one, I always think to myself, would the midsection with the whales and the seagulls and echoes really would have existed if they hadn't tried doing something similar like what we find on this song? And well, I think that this one is an influential one, and honestly, I come back to it because I have a really odd taste in music sometimes. If you know me and if you know the channel, I've told this many a times before. This is my favorite album of all times, and because of a specific song, which is the title track, Adam Hart Mother. Sweet. I will not elaborate on this one too much, but just know that everything from the start to the finish of this particular song is perfect in my opinion. I have listened to this one hundreds of times. I have wasted, of course I haven't wasted, but I've wasted multiple days and weeks on just sitting down and listening to this song because it is so good. Everything about it is just mind-bogglingly groundbreaking. This song has never been tried before, and well, they succeeded on their first try. And for anyone who doesn't really realize the charm in the Atom Heart Mother Suite, you should really get along to listening to it multiple times like right now, because I must admit it is one, if not the most brilliant song ever written by anyone. Yeah, that's just my take on it.
Must never had too much to drink.
So going backwards a bit, this is Relics by Pink Floyd, coming out in early 1971. This is a bunch, an amalgamation of their earlier tracks, some of them unreleased, at least not on bootlegs. And well, I love this album and I decided to put it into their whole discography because I feel like it has a bunch of new material that doesn't really appear anywhere on their other albums. And my personal favorite from this one is Paint Box. This one goes into the category of Matilda Mother and Remember a Day for Me, and they're more popular tracks, but they do have this really interesting psychedelic aspect to them. And when it comes to earlier Pink Floyd, I think that this is hands down my favorite early Pink Floyd track. Paint Box is just amazing. The guitar, the lyricism, the way that it makes me feel, the downward spiral, the hopelessness, the hope, everything about it is just so good. And of course, it is led by Richard Wright, and honestly, what more can I ask? And from here we move on to the more mainstream era of Pink Floyd with metal and my personal favorite song from this album, The Echoes Suite. This is no surprise, honestly, to anyone. Like, it has some really good tracks on it. I love songs like One of These Days or even Saint-Tropez or Seamus for that extent, but honestly, when it comes down to the best track on this album, there's really no comparing. Echoes is a masterpiece. It is a once-in-a-lifetime making, and honestly, while you might say that some of Pink Floyd's better work came in the later 70s, this is just, something to marvel upon, and there's really no way of looking past it. Echoes is a masterpiece, and of course most of you can agree with me. I think that this song really changed my life when I heard it, because I was postponing listening to it for so long because a friend of mine told me that you wouldn't really get it probably on the first time, but when I listened to it the first time, I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like I got it right away. So Obscured by Gods is an interesting album because it comes in a very interesting position between two of Pink Floyd's best albums to date, and it's, a bit of a mediocre one. I personally really like this album, but there's a lot of people who would beg to differ, and my personal track from this one has to be Childhood's End. There are many great things to marvel upon in this album, but Childhood's End is just David Gilmour going all the way with what he believes, the way that he knows how to create music. You have his lovely vocals, you have the guitar solos, you have the backing guitar, and I feel like while this might be a very Gilmour song, it still manages to captivate me over and over again. And being young and lively as I am, I can relate to a lot of what this song actually portrays in its lyrics. Moving on to the holy grail of Pink Floyd. Whether you like them as a prog band or not, whether you know them or not, you know the Dark Side of the Moon. And my personal favorite track from this album has to be Eclipse, although if I had to pair them, I would say Brain Damage and Eclipse together, because that opening of Eclipse, the way that everything explodes into this furious, lovely, magnificent, end of all is just sublime. It sends shivers down my spines every time I hear it. I would go back to this album and I would start to its 44 minutes only to get to the end because it was so freaking gratifying. Eclipse is the song that encapsulates the human soul. If all of this album was building up many motifs in such excellent ways, this is the one that captures them all in one grand finale. And well, just the fact that this song exists and it's as good as it is makes it a favorite of mine, not even when compared just to the Pink Floyd discography, but when compared to music as a whole. climbing down a bit and going to something much more mellow but still as impactful as everything that came before it, we have Shine On You Crazy Diamond. And yes, specifically I choose my favorite as the first 5 parts of this one that feature in the beginning of this album. It has a lot of great songs on it. I really like Have a Cigar and of course Wish You Were Here and Welcome to the Machine, but when it comes down to it, Shine On You Crazy Diamond just gets me every single time. There's really no going over it. It's such an influential song. You know, it goes by these very, very simple 4 chords that are so deeply rooted in the hearts of many of us, and this is definitely a play this at my funeral type of song, if you know what I mean. Coming into Animals from 1977, and with one of my first ever favorites from Pink Floyd. When I got into this band and I listened to their discography, there weren't many songs that I immediately could say, oh, these are definite favorites of mine. But Sheep was always such a song. I don't really get why people like Dogs and Pigs more. I think that they're great songs nonetheless, but Sheep just seems to stand so much higher above than those two, and at least that's me. I love everything about it. I love the way that it begins. I love the way that it crescendos all along. I really love the spoken word at towards the end. It is one of the more influential segments in any Pink Floyd song that I've ever heard, and the overall meaning of this, much like the rest of this album, is just very thought-provoking. And as someone who has read Animal Farm by George Orwell so many times by now, this one just goes to me like bread and butter with this album. Moving on to The Wall, probably my first ever favorite from the Pink Floyd discography. I love The Wall. I think it's a great album, and no matter what anyone else says, this is a beauty that we were blessed with receiving back in the late 70s. But when it comes to my favorite track on it, I know that it comes as a surprise to many. It is not Hey You, it is not Comfortably Numb, it is not even the very popular part 2 of Another Brick in the Wall. It is actually Is There Anybody Out There? I think that I'm a bit biased on this one because I learned to play this song on the guitar basically since I got a guitar, and I love playing it ever since, but I just think that it's so freaking unique and so perfect, and it encapsulates everything good that Pink Floyd can achieve with the most minimal soundscapes and instruments. And while this album can get really grandiose at times, and we can see that especially on the second side of this album, this song encapsulates everything that is soft, that is mellow, and that is very, very well thought out about how Pink Floyd makes their music, and especially how they're very much creatively led sometimes by David Gilmour, who doesn't even let Roger Waters really overshadow him, even if it's mostly a Roger Waters project, that is.
It was just before dawn, one miserable.
So from this point onwards, we get into this Pink Floyd era that I must admit I don't know that well. I don't come back to it that often, but I still think that I know enough to talk about my personal favorites. And of course, starting us off with the final cut, and my favorite from this album has to be When the Tigers Broke Free. Now again, I think I'm a bit biased because they do include this song in the film version of The Wall, and that's where I was mainly exposed to it, but I also have a really good friend who also thinks that this is one of their best albums and best songs ever, and well, it kind of influenced me for a while. There are some great nuggets on here like Two Suns in a Sunset and stuff like that, but When the Tigers Broke Free just seems to really match up with the previous Wall album, and I think that it just encapsulates everything that I liked about that one, but transformed in this new album by The Floyd. Okay, so A Momentary Lapse of Reason is definitely the Pink Floyd album that I'm least familiar with. I've listened to it for the first time just last year in my 365 Days of Prog series, and when it comes down to it, I've chosen one favorite from that album, and I've sort of come back to it from time to time. It's The Dogs of War. It's an interesting Gilmour-esque song. It could definitely have been found on a solo Gilmour album, and for what it's worth, I think it's one of the more proggiest pieces on this very not so proggy album, that is. And well, it's nice, but most of the times I would just skip one album ahead when I came to this one. So my personal favorite from the Division Bell is actually the opening track for the album. It is Cluster 1. For a long time I would have chosen the Division Bell like every other person, but I don't know, I've kind of grown out from this song and Cluster 1 has kind of grown on me since. It's a beautiful opening piece. It really encapsulates the fact that Gilmour and Richard Wright can now work together, you know, without any boundaries and create these lovely soundscapes that Wright has worked on in his own solo career for a while. It sounds so good. The piano, everything about it, the guitar and the piano just melding with one another, it really sets the mood for it, for great songs to come later on like Marooned and stuff like that. But as an opener for a Pink Floyd album, I think this has to be one of, if not the best one ever. And last but not least, we have The Endless River, basically a sort of compilation album from a lot of things that Richard Wright did that was released after his passing in 2008. I would have listened to this one more had it still been on Spotify today, but unfortunately it isn't. But there's one particular song from this album that I've loved from the first moment I've heard it, and I've put it on many different playlists that I've had over the years, and that has to be Autumn 68. Yes, I know there are a bunch of different songs from this album. There are way more popular like Louder Than Words and even Talking Hawking for that example, but Autumn 68 is short, it is concise, and it features the Royal Albert Hall pipe organ played by Richard Wright, and it sounds so amazing. You're just really set back to it. Everything just encapsulates your mind. You can really up the volume to 100, put on the headphones, and just experience the extremity that is this song. It feels like some sort of a long overdue funeral march for Wright, if that's something to be said, and I don't know, just everything about it. It really encapsulates whatever Wright was thinking in his mind, whatever he wanted to explore, and what he got to do so in this final album that mainly features him. And when it comes down to it, I also feel like this song in particular really matches up with the album cover for this one. So yeah, it is a really perfect track, and probably the last perfect track that Pink Floyd will ever release, in my opinion. But yeah, these were my 2 cents on this topic. I love Pink Floyd, and there are so many other songs that I would call my favorites that I did not mention in this video, but do let me know in the comments, what are your personal favorites from the 16 albums in Pink Floyd's discography? I'd love to know how we are similar and by what we differ. So yeah, and I just want to remind you all, I'm doing a giveaway contest, and if you want to enter that, just look at my last video because it's really freaking cool. And with that being said, have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you all on a different video. Bye bye.